you.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Welcome to Strangers in a Strange Land, How We Learn to Stop Worrying and Love Our OER Colleagues, or the story of how Century College expanded its open educational resources among twists and turns in the last couple of years. I'd like to do a round of introductions. I'm one of those strangers in a strange land, Eric Rydell, Dean of Nursing, CT and Online, and I just joined Century within the past year, and I'm very new to both Century and the Minnesota State system.
I'm Rhonda Madison. I'm one of the librarians at Century, and I've been around for a while.
And I'm Kelly Donahue, and I have been around for 2 sabbaticals worth.
I'm Caroline Toscano. I'm the instructional designer at Century, and I started in July, so relatively new as well.
And I'm Crystal DeCam. I fall in between those 2 categories of a long time and not so long.
So I'd like to start just giving a little bit of background, and we'll tell some of our story. And I'd like to leave the last 10 minutes or so for some questions and discussions. So some background about Century College is that we're a 2-year community technical college in Minnesota, of a very diverse enrollment of students seeking certificates and associate's degrees. A lot of first generation students, English language learners, students of color. Like every other college and university, we moved quickly to online because of COVID in the past year. We were at a relatively low online enrollment, depending on how you think about it, from 20% all the way to 80% of pure online, and then some hybrid this fall. We are part of I think the 3rd largest community college system in the country, Minnesota State system, with over 340,000 students, 30 colleges and 7 universities. And as part of the Minnesota State system's effort to increase open educational resources, they were directed by the Minnesota legislature to develop a program to support colleges to offer 0 textbook costs courses, in fact, a full associate's degree's worth. In a relatively short time, the grants were issued in 2019 and and colleges were asked to put out their 0 textbook costs courses within a year. 10 colleges, including Century, received grants, either $100,000 or a small grant of $10,000 for those who had already made a lot of inroads in open educational resources. So far, the system estimates that we saved students over $1.25 million in textbook fees. So, Rhonda, I'll turn it over to you to talk about some of the history before the grant and early on.
Okay, so I got my start in open educational resources. There was in fall of 2017, there was a workshop for Minnesota State system librarians, and the system office held that workshop. And at the end of the workshop, they said, what's your action plan? Which was a really smart idea, because my action plan was to present a workshop or a breakout session at every faculty development opportunity for the next, for the foreseeable future. So I've been doing it for 2 or 3 years now. And in fall of 2018, 2 of the librarians at Century participated in a Creative Commons certification opportunity that was offered by the system office. And in the process, a lot of Century faculty started using open educational resources. And like one of our departments, the biology department, I discovered was already using an open textbook when I first heard about open educational resources. So by fall of 2019, when the Z degree opportunity came along, we were well positioned to pursue that grant. So the Dean of Online Learning at the time applied for that $100,000 Z degree grant. And then in October of last year, we got that grant. But the timeline was really aggressive. We had to have a degree in place by the 2020-2021 academic year. And, you know, that was like a 6-month timeline. The system was offering learning circles, which would start in January. You know, this is fall, this is October. And the system wanted the faculty participating in the Z degree to sign up for meetings in November. And at Century, we hadn't quite figured out what degree we were offering, much less which faculty were going to participate. So it was the timeline was a little too aggressive for what we were ready for. So by November, we had decided to have an AA degree, but it was unclear at that point whether the degree was going to be all online or mixed. And the solicitation for faculty participation went out in mid-November. And the good news was that a lot of our classes were already Z degree compliant when we applied for the grant. So we're pretty sure we would have the ability to have a degree in place. And then in December of 2019, we realized that the applications for the Z degree participation from faculty were short in certain goal areas. For an AA, you have to have 2 courses in each goal area, you know, like the world and the arts. And so we were going to be short in certain goal areas to complete an AA. So the deans were recruiting faculty from those areas. And the system office was pressuring Century to provide the faculty names for the participation in these learning circles that were going to start in January. And things were chaotic. And going into winter break, we were not quite there. And then in an unrelated event, the Dean of Online Learning left to take a new job. So then we get to January and we still don't have the faculty in the learning circles. Some faculty didn't put their OER compliant courses forward because they had heard that the AA was going to be all online, which was not true. And then we started to get the new staff. We got a new instructional designer, came on board in January, and then Eric was hired to help lead the online learning initiatives and to shepherd the Z degree. So chaos. And now I leave it to Eric to tell how it all,
Sure.
Oh, it got fixed.
how it got fixed.
So I actually got hired out of the blue to be the Dean of Nursing, and then in addition asked if I could take some leadership role on online, and came from online institutions. And online, no problem. So, and I was in for a surprise. So again, yeah, I did not have a lot of experience with the community college system. I was very interested in it, and none with Century. And I just assumed that we would pick up from where we dropped off, not understanding that there was some misperceptions and miscommunication around what open educational resources were and what the grant was. And first governance meeting I had in February, the governance body said, well, we need a new task force to include faculty in, and essentially forced us to reset our plans. And you know, I was sort of baffled by this, but as I learned more, there was a lot of more room to communicate, and there was a lot more of a story that needed to be told. Going through the spring, the task force, which is essentially a group of about 10 faculty across the institution and committed to OER, made a great set of recommendations about how to offer options to participate in the grant and develop their courses, faculty to develop their courses, and created a survey to survey how many faculty were interested, and really set the stage for that. Come fall, we're able to implement those plans, and actually quickly, because we took the time to understand that we did have an existing base of faculty that were already using open educational resources or were close to it, were interested. To date, we have 49 courses in process, 30 already completed. We actually can technically offer an AA degree with zero cost textbooks. So I have some questions about how we're advertising that in the registration and so forth as we go forth. But we do have plans to continue and potentially double that number of courses into the spring. So we didn't include number of challenges and resources in this journey. It wasn't smooth. So I'll turn over first to Kelly to talk about something about those dynamics in Century.
Sure. So there were some fits and some starts, and there's been some confusion about what OERs are and what a Z degree is, in part because of the communication isn't maybe as robust as it could be, and in part because I think some of our faculty have some anxiety, especially around new administrators. And so, for instance, one of the concerns that we've seen is that people are afraid if they sign up to do an OER, or if they tell people that they're using OERs, that somehow their syllabi will be considered common property. And so that's been one of the issues that we've had to address sort of again and again. And what we think happened is 2 emails came out maybe the same day. One that said to faculty that they had to turn in copies of their syllabi, which happens every semester, which is just something that we keep so that when students transfer, we can say, here's what they learned. But we think it came out probably on the same day that information about OERs came out, and in people's minds, they were the same thing. So it was essentially Eric saying, I'd like to steal faculty intellectual property. And so that's been something that we've sort of talked about. It's in one of the FAQs that Rondi just put out. It's something that comes up again and again. It sounds silly, but it actually keeps sort of coming up. So that's been a nice rumor. Another problem is the size of our institution compared to other institutions. And so our institution is either the biggest or the second biggest in Mid-State. The second biggest 2-year in Mid-State. What that means is that it takes a little bit of extra time to communicate because there are just so many people.
And then another challenge is the understanding of intellectual property. And in Century is a union environment. The faculty union at Century has the right to own their intellectual property. Anything they develop for Century belongs to them. So the question is, what happens when they develop like ancillary materials to go along with a textbook, like quizzes or worksheets? Who owns that property? And if they share it, do they still own it? And so there's been a lot of education on Creative Commons licensing, how you can retain the copyright, but allow certain rights and allow reuse by other people. So that's been interesting.
Yes, Rondi, as Rondi was saying, that there were some questions and concerns about intellectual property. As a new instructional designer, I really wasn't aware of some of these communications. And so when I talked with faculty, they would say, well, what about intellectual property? And I was a little bit surprised. I really wasn't sure what that was about, but so that was definitely something that came up a few times. And going on to the next point, the next challenge, new administration and staff being involved in this process is, there's something called the liability of newness, which can sometimes be tricky when you're dealing with a new cultural milieu in a community college like Century. And for example, part of my job was to verify to make sure that faculty had OERs. If they said they had OERs already in their course shells, my job was to kind of verify that, trust but verify. And so I kind of assumed, because at other institutions I've been to as an instructional designer, you could just go in there and as an admin and just kind of check it out. And I noticed one shell I couldn't find the OER. It didn't seem to be explicit to me. So I contacted the faculty and said, I'm sorry, I don't really see where your OER is. And then the faculty member said, well, you know, you're not supposed to do that. This is, you know, we're a unionized environment and you need to ask permission in order to get into our shells. So I was right away, I thought, oh yeah, okay, so this is a totally new culture. And so just understanding the lay of the land can be a big challenge.
So just going along with the theme of communication, I think some of the things I learned were that just not to make the same assumptions from, you know, prior environments about communication. I mean, communication, every college, university is a problem, but I didn't necessarily understand assumptions about sort of the breadth and, you know, how long a program or initiative should get socialized. When it was talked about doing another survey, I thought, well, why we did one survey, but I didn't understand that it really only caught the attention of a small group of faculty. We had listed some of the resources, and for me, it was really key, that task force, even though at first I thought, well, already the faculty know, why do we need a faculty task force? But they were able to provide me as an administrator a lot of mentoring in terms of understanding the college culture, how faculty were receiving it, what the dynamics were. And so that was a great resource in terms of me growing as an administrator and professional in this context. And I think the other one is that the system did provide mentors from other institutions within the system who had some experience in OER. And Rondi and I and the task force met with this faculty who had done a lot of OER at another system institution. He was able to give an outsider's perspective, which was also helpful.
And a lot of our conversation has been about like the faculty and the administration and the college's experience and challenges with this. And I wanted to make sure to highlight that there are some challenges even with the student's perspective of OER and this term of Z degree. In my role as a counselor, I've had students come up to me and go, like, I want a Z degree. But that's not actually a degree at our campus. Like it's a term to use that you can get an associate's with no cost textbooks, right? And so that's a little bit different than an actual AA degree. And so communicating that with students has been a challenge. And we're really working on building the language to make it more understandable for students and to make sure that like at the bookstore, there's a conversation about that because at our college, like there's a lot of students that are very cautious about the money that they're spending. And so a $50 savings is a really big deal to them. And so we want to make sure that we can keep that conversation open to the students as well.
Sure. And then there have been some very specific Minnesota State legal problems. And so Minnesota State legislators have passed 2 laws specifically to address the price of textbooks. And I actually just dropped a link in the chat. The laws are sort of fascinating and really specific. The first one is that Minnesota State college bookstores have to make enough money to pay their staff. So they can get free space and the college can pay their insurance for the space, not for their people, but they have to pay their own staff. So when we use OERs, we're not contributing to that. That's something that's going to have to be addressed in the next couple of years. They have to make enough money to have bookstore people, but we're not contributing to that money at all with OERs. So that's a problem. The second problem in the second law is better, I think, even more interesting. And it says that faculty have to order books at least 45 days before classes start. And then the bookstore 30 days before the first day of class have to post a schedule of all of the classes that are offered and all of the materials that students need to purchase for those classes. But it has 9 subcategories. So if you go to that and you scroll all the way down, there are 9 subcategories that must be posted. So they include stuff that makes sense, right? So they include the author, the title, the edition, and the price of anything that you use in your class. But if I use OERs, I might not have a single author because I might use 35 articles from our library's database. So my OER, what I'm using for free materials, isn't going to match the law that the bookstore is trying to enforce, right? And they're not trying to be difficult. They're saying, look, here's what the law says. We need these 9 things. I can't give them those 9 things. So now they're out of compliance. That's a big deal. That's going to have to be solved. What ends up happening right now is they send me notes, and they're escalating notes. So they send notes that say, first, you have to order your books. So there is a way around it that we've developed recently, and that's that you can check a little box. You go into the bookstore's database and you check a box that says, I don't use materials for this class. But I do use materials for this class, so I hate checking that box because it confuses students. And students know when they take my short novel class, they're going to need short novels, right? Everybody knows that. So then they send me an irritated email saying, look, you know, you got to order books because I don't have enough time to screw around. That's an actual email that I got this semester. There needs to be a better way to communicate with students. And part of it means that something's going to have to change, and either the law is going to have to change or the bookstore is going to have to do some workaround. They need to, for instance, say what edition, the prices of things, the prices of all the components if they're bundled, and then the prices of all your materials if they're separate. That's part of the law. There are 9 components in that. They need to have an ISBN number. But if I use a free textbook, an OER textbook, I don't have an ISBN textbook. So those are the sort of things that we sort of need to think about as in the future, and particularly at Minnesota State.
So with that, we do have a few minutes for questions or comments. We've shared a lot of twists and turns, challenges. I will say the task force's recommendation that we did, which was actually asked someone from the bookstore to join the task force, was a smart move, and I think helped, even though it was very recent.
If you have comments, you can type them in the chat. I'll keep an eye on that.
So I know getting close to the end, so I asked the panelists, any lessons learned from this experience so far? Or advice you would give to others looking at similar projects?
I think transparency and just really working and collaboratively getting through.
Oh, there's a question. Does Minnesota have state legislation requiring that OER or zero textbook cost courses be tagged on the schedule and registration systems? Oh boy, Eric, you can take that.
That's a great question. No, and that's kind of the rub, is that we actually did fulfill the requirements of the grant by offering a zero cost textbook degree or set of courses, but there was no requirement to put them in the registrations or note them in the registration using a textbook cost field. Now we are doing that, and we're committed to doing that in the spring as part of this, but it was definitely a gray area, and certainly recommend anybody else doing that clarify that really way up front. It became a sore spot this fall.
Yeah, it might have been better if they had required it, because faculty have a concern that if someone uses that drop down and restricts their course search to only courses that are OER, that they'll be left out if they don't join the Z degree. And since they get to choose which materials to use in their course, that kind of goes against their right to choose. Well, anyway, it's complicated. And another person says, oh, good, glad to know you've asked the bookstore manager to join the OER task force. It's something we did it here at our college, and it made a huge difference. Thanks for sharing the twists and turns in your own OER journey. I think one of the things that I find is that in the Minnesota State system, some of the smaller schools have had great success with getting a Z degree going and having all their faculty on board with OER. And I think the thing that I am realizing slowly is that with a large institution like Century, it is a slow slog. And that's not to say there aren't a lot of people on board. And getting a Z degree together is fairly easy because we do have a lot of people on board, but getting a lot of, there's always more people to evangelize to. Oh, here's a comment. Our bookstore was able to create a dummy ISBN for us for our OER and ZTC courses. It's helpful, except where they keep changing the number.
Oh,
It's really interesting how much is required. Until I read that law, I had no idea why there was such a focus on ISBN numbers or such a focus on what was being bundled and then the price of each component and if there was a discount for the bundling. But that's actually in the law, so they can't skip that. They're not trying to be difficult. So for me, that reading that law was eye-opening. I just was tired of having conversations about the ISBN number when I was using OERs. But no, he wasn't crazy. I just didn't understand. So that was super helpful for me. But obviously a huge problem that needs to be worked around so that we can start using OERs. I think one of the things that we're trying to do at Century too is make sure that the message stays the same, that this is extra work that faculty do for sure, but it's worthwhile to our students, that $50, that $150, that $250 is really meaningful to our students. And a lot of times that's the difference between letting them succeed in college and making sure that they can eat and having them not succeed in college. And so there is some pushback from faculty, but really only at the details and the edges. They maybe don't like how it hasn't been a smooth rollout, but I think overall they're pro OER. We understand our students are poor and we understand that we can save our students money if we do a little bit of extra work, and people are really strongly into doing whatever they can to help our students.
I think that's
Fantastic.
true.
I'm going to have to stop the recording now, but there's space in the room to stay for another 15 minutes to continue the conversation.